The Boys, Volume 7, The Innocents. This is covering issues 39 to 47, written by Garth Ennis, art by Darick Robertson, John McCrea with Keith Burns, and Russ Braun. And before I dive into Volume 7, I want to talk about what series I'm going to cover after The Boys. I'm not 100% sold on what series I'm going to do next. I have various ones I'm contemplating, and I want to throw it to you, the viewers, to vote and help me decide. So I found out that YouTube has some sort of polling mechanism, and I can integrate a poll right into this video that you can all vote on. So please vote on what series you want me to cover after The Boys. The 5 series I'm thinking about are 1, Y the Last Man, written by Brian K. Vaughan. It's a very cool Vertigo series about a guy. He's the only man left on Earth. All the other men have been wiped out, but all the female population is fine. So how does society go on after this? It's very cool, very mysterious, a little bit post-apocalyptic. Great series. It's going to be a TV show on FX in 2020. I'm also thinking about doing Sandman by Neil Gaiman, one of the most critically acclaimed comic series of all time. It's very trippy. It's very weird. It's all about like a dream world. It's going to be a TV show on Netflix eventually. You might know Neil Gaiman from American Gods or Good Omens. So very cool series there. I'm thinking of doing Preacher by Garth Ennis. So if you like The Boys, if you like Garth Ennis, perhaps you want to see me carry on with that. I'm thinking of also doing Jupiter's Legacy by Mark Millar. It's going to be a TV show on Netflix. It is a deconstruction of the superhero, a lot like The Boys. You have these heroes and they're very kind of messed up. Very cool series. I'm also contemplating doing Invincible by Robert Kirkman. It's one of my favorite comics of all time. So fun. It's this whole self-contained superhero world where heroes die and death matters, and it's really fun, really gory, really great book. So those are the 5 I'm thinking about. Please vote and help me decide what to do next. So now let's talk about The Boys Volume 7. We're going to be introduced to a new hero group called SUPERDUPER, and they are really silly. And then after that, we're going to get some fallout between Hughie and Annie, and Hughie discovering Annie's secret identity and that she's a member of the 7, as well as what she had to do to join the 7. So let's dive into the story. Issue 39, What I Know. So Butcher is going over all his files he has on the 7. We see he has an image of Annie, of Homelander, of A-Train, etc. Butcher is holding a newspaper and he laughs at the headline, which is R.I.P. Soldier Boy. So that's important because last volume Butcher was torturing Soldier Boy for information. He wanted to know who sent Soldier Boy and payback to try to attack the boys. So it looks like Butcher got the info he needed and then he killed Soldier Boy. We see Butcher wrote on a post-it note over a picture of James Stillwell that Soldier Boy and Payback were sent by Vought Americans, President of Operations of Soup Development. Although at this point, Butcher hasn't actually learned James Stillwell's name, but we know his job title, Vought Americans President of Operations of Soup Development. So Hughie is having a trippy sort of bad dream. He's seeing images of pink aliens, and then he sees A-Train making out with his dead ex-girlfriend, and then A-Train killing Annie. So Hughie is this is just a bad dream for him, and he wakes up in a cold sweat. Now jumping over to Mother's Milk, we see Mother's Milk is with a prostitute, and he pays her to stay a little longer, and it looks like Mother's Milk has some sort of weird fetish where he wants to suck her nipples like a baby. This is probably due to some weird issue with his mom because he's dependent on his mom's breast milk. So it's something to do with that. Mother's Milk is a little bit messed up over that whole situation. So Annie and Hughie later on in the issue are at some porn shop and they are buying some XXX videos because Annie wants to experiment a bit and go back to Hughie's place later for some fun. Now back at Vought American headquarters, Stillwell is introduced to Jess Bradley. She is an ambitious and shrewd executive eager to join Stillwell's soup development team. We learn through her conversation that Stillwell was not selected to be the new CEO of Vought American after the last CEO died of a heart attack. But it seems Stillwell purposely didn't want to be CEO. He threw his hat in the ring to put up the appearance that he wanted the job, but he didn't mount a serious campaign to sway the board of directors to pick him. And Jess theorizes that Stillwell is planning some radical moves in the soup development division, and Stillwell wanted someone else to be CEO if things go poorly, because then the CEO would be the fall guy and get blamed. So essentially, Stillwell is happier in his current position, and he wants a patsy in the CEO position. Now, Stillwell doesn't confirm or deny this theory to Jess Bradley, but he then excuses himself, and then he congratulates the new Vought American CEO, a Mr. Brewster. So back at Hughie's apartment, him and Annie are getting it on. They're watching some of those XXX videos they bought. And Hughie, all of a sudden, he stops and fast forwards the video that they are watching. And Hughie says to Annie, "Oh, I don't like when they do this in porn, when there's one girl and she's taking on two guys. It's a real turnoff. It's disgusting. What must she be like to do that?" And Annie is a little bit offended by this. After all, she had that whole coerced triple blowjob back in Volume 1 with Homelander, Black Noir, and A-Train. So Annie just kind of shuts down from this, and she stops their sex session, and she changes the topic to lunch, but you can tell this really bothered Annie and Hughie's reaction to this. Now we go over to Frenchie, and he's trying to keep the female occupied by giving her some reading material, because he doesn't want her to keep doing these contract kills. So he's trying to stop her from going out on these murder sprees, because it got her in trouble last issue with Stormfront. She almost got killed from it. So Frenchie manages to keep her occupied, and then Frenchie goes and talks to Butcher, and we learn that Frenchie has wiretapped the female's phone, and he's monitoring all her movement. So hopefully, if someone else contacts her for a contract hit, Frenchie can interfere and stop it. Now, we go back over to Hughie and Annie, and they are walking in the street, having a good time. They are making up for the awkwardness that they had earlier when they were watching the XXX video. And we see scenes of the two of them intertwined with scenes of Butcher walking on the street. All of a sudden, though, Butcher sees Hughie and Annie kiss and say goodbye, and Butcher, watching from a distance, he recognizes Annie from his files on the 7, and he knows that Annie is Starlight, and Butcher is shocked because now he sees Hughie dating Annie from the 7. So finally, we have Butcher discovering Hughie and Annie's relationship, and we're going to see some of the fallout of that play out in this volume. Issue 40, The Innocents, Part 1 of 4. So we are introduced to a new superhero team called SUPERDUPER. And we open up on this team, and they are a C-list minor league hero group of low-powered supes who truly desire to use their abilities for good. Their fake origin is that they are permanent teenagers from the year 5000 or something. So they are something of an analog to DC's Legion of Superheroes, but of course that is just their origin story. They are not actually from the future. So many of their members appear to either be extremely naive or mentally slow. So their members are Black Hole, and he is a human garbage disposal. He claims he can eat anything, and he is an analog to an obscure DC character called Matter Eater Lad. Then there is Bobby Badoing, and he is a good-natured teenager. His body is extremely elastic, and he has the power to bounce like a rubber ball, and he also eats a lot of food. There is Clanker. Clanker is a polymorph who can transform his body into a variety of metal objects. He's basically Iron Man if you literally needed a man who could turn into an iron. He has Tourette syndrome, so he often shouts out random obscenities. There is Kid Camo, and he is a shapeshifter, a master of disguise, although he lacks control, which generally results in him ending up as a pool of liquid on the ground. So there is also Stool Shadow. She is an analog to the X-Men Kitty Pryde, only she is completely incompetent. She can walk through walls with supposed phasing powers, or maybe she only thinks she can because she's never been shown to successfully be able to do that. She is constantly covered in bruises and bandages, which are the result of her repeated attempts to walk through solid objects and failing and hurting herself. There is Ladyfold, and it's a little bit unclear what her powers are exactly, but whatever they are somehow tied to her menstrual cycle. So once a month, she is unstoppable. And then there is Auntie Sis, and she is everyone's favorite aunt/sister. Her actual powers are unrevealed. She appears to be the team's unofficial leader. Auntie Sis appears to act as like a protector to the other members of SUPERDUPER, and she appears to be the only one that's like self-aware of what's actually going on, and she alone appears to be familiar with the depraved actions and behaviors of the other mainstream supes, and she wants to insulate her younger teammates from all that. Although she denies being team leader, it's obvious that the other members of the team look to her for direction. So when we open up on this team, they just took their team photo and they are admiring their costumes. Then Clanker's Tourette's kicks in and he swears, and he then turns into an anvil. Now the entire team though are just such good friends and they really care about each other. So unlike a lot of the other teams we've met, this group of heroes are just so wholesome and so happy and just love being on a team with one another. So we jump over to Butcher and he goes to meet the Legend so they can update each other on what they've learned. And Legend says that VOD American is thinking of bringing in this West Coast team to replace Payback. And this one hero named Malchemical is also being sent to take over the group SUPERDUPER, probably to give the team a dark makeover or something. Now Butcher, he reveals to the Legend that he saw Hughie dating Annie or Starlight from the Seven, and Butcher thinks that Hughie is working for VOD American. Now the Legend looks at Butcher's file on Starlight, and he almost can't believe that Hughie wouldn't know who she is, but he also argues that maybe it's possible Hughie wouldn't know. I mean, he's got one of those brains that's kind of concentrates on one thing at once. So it's possible he wouldn't know she was part of the Seven, although it is a little unlikely. So the Legend and Butcher are really conflicted on whether Hughie is working with VOD American or not. They go back and forth discussing the likelihood of it. Eventually, Butcher decides to use this Malchemical taking over the group SUPERDUPER as some kind of test for Hughie to get to the truth of the matter. So later on, back at the boys' HQ, Butcher assigns Hughie to look into that SUPERDUPER hero group, and then he also gives Hughie a picture of Malchemical to look at, and we learn that Malchemical is one of the worst supes at VOD American. So it's kind of a weird move for VOD American to send him over to SUPERDUPER, whose image is all sweetness and light. So why would Malchemical be integrated into this group? Now Malchemical is a shapeshifter. He can alter his form, chemical composition, material, and density in any way he chooses. And he's a little bit of a bad boy. So that is what Hughie's assignment is. Now Hughie argues with Butcher about this because he thinks looking into SUPERDUPER is a waste of time. They're nobodies, but Butcher kind of forces Hughie to accept this mission. Now later on, before heading off to his mission to watch over SUPERDUPER, because Hughie's going to be gone for a few days to look into this, so Hughie decides to say bye to Annie as he's going to be gone for a while, but before he leaves, he tells Annie that he loves her. And I guess this is the first time they said they love each other to one another, so it's kind of big for their relationship, and Butcher is watching this from the shadows suspiciously. Now back at VOD American headquarters, James Stillwell has already brought this Jess Bradley into his confidence and is briefing her on various things. Now he seems to be very impressed with her, and later on in the day when they are on the roof, we learn that Stillwell has had his eye on this Jess Bradley for 9 years and was kind of impressed with her and was planning on bringing her onto his team, but he was waiting for her to approach him. So when she finally did, he pulled the trigger and brought her on his team immediately. Now Jess and James Stillwell, then discuss the Homelander, and they are especially focused on a series of photographs that apparently the boys took of the Homelander and sent to him to sort of freak him out that, look at what we have on you. And when they show the photos to us as the reader, we see the Homelander literally soaked from head to toe in blood, engaging in grisly acts of murder, cannibalism, and necrophilia against men, women, and children. Homelander is literally eating a baby here. So we learn that this incident happened 20 years ago. And Butcher sent the photos to Homelander so Homelander would know what he had on him. And for the last 2 decades, Homelander has been under close monitoring by VOD American, but nothing like that incident ever happened again. All the observers of the incident drew the conclusion that this incident would remain unique. Now, Jess asks Stillwell, why didn't you just have Homelander killed years ago? You have the means, and since there's been another episode of Homelander acting erratically recently, referring to when Homelander perhaps killed an airplane of innocent civilians at Herogasm, why not take Homelander out now? And Stillwell says that the airplane will be difficult to confirm if it was Homelander or not because it's at the bottom of the ocean. But regardless, it would be a mistake to proceed. Stillwell says he has carefully watched Homelander, even pushed him from time to time. Homelander seems to get angry and break things and has some petty schemes he tries to put together. But if it wasn't for the photographic evidence, it would seem that Homelander doesn't seem to have any psychotic tendencies at all, at least according to Stillwell. Stillwell also says, the fact is we need Homelander, we need the Seven, and with the loss of Payback and the G-Men recently, the Seven are our #1 earners. Stillwell also admits that sending Payback into the fight with the boys was a miscalculation. He should have realized they were not capable, but for now though, they have to maintain their revenue levels, and until they can get their whole soups in the military thing worked out, they kind of have to keep everything status quo for now. Now, jumping back over to Super Duper, they are hanging out at their house. Stool Shadow attempts to phase through the wall to the kitchen, but she fails and just walks into the wall and hurts herself. Her team members come to her aid quickly though, and then Clanker and Auntie Sis are talking, and Clanker just says how much he loves Super Duper. We may not be the greatest superheroes in the world, we look a little old-fashioned, maybe some of our powers aren't all that cool, and I know we don't get invited to some of the things the other teams do, but I still wouldn't want to be in any other group than Super Duper. So they clearly just love being a team together. Issue 41, The Innocents, Part 2 of 4. So Mel Chemical has officially arrived at Super Duper, and they are throwing him a welcoming party, but he is not impressed. Now, Bobby Bedoing is bouncing all over the room. Black Hole asks when they are going to go out on their first big adventure, and Mel Chemical says, I don't know, what did the last guy do? And Auntie Sis says, well, we didn't have a leader before. We've sort of just been waiting to go out on missions, I suppose. And Mel Chemical asks, waiting? So you just sit around all day? And Auntie Sis explains that, well, we go out on patrol in the neighborhood and take care of any local stuff. And she asks if Mel Chemical wants to join them when they go out on patrol later that day. And Mel Chemical says, I'll pass. And then all of a sudden, Clanker's Tourette's kicks in and he swears, and Mel Chemical finds this hilarious, and that the Clanker can't control his swearing, and Mel Chemical begins to laugh hard over this. Kid Camo doesn't get what's so funny, and Bobby Bedoing is stuffing his face with cake in the background. So Auntie Sis insists that Mel Chemical come on patrol with them so he can sort of integrate himself more with the group, and he reluctantly agrees. So Super Duper heads out on patrol, walking around the neighborhood, and Hughie is surveilling them from the car. So he has already begun his surveilling job. Now, the first mission for Super Duper is a cat stuck in a tree. Now, Bobby Bedoing is laying on the ground in case the kitten falls, it can land on him. And Ladyfold, Stool Shadow, and Clanker are trying to distract the cat. Kid Camo is using his shape-shifting power to try and grab the cat, but then all of a sudden the cat gets scared, it falls from the tree and lands on Bobby Bedoing and bounces high up into the air. Now Kid Camo loses control of his shape-shifting powers and turns into a puddle. Clanker attempts to turn his body into an iron for some reason, that will help, but then he accidentally just turns into a chain. Now Bobby Bedoing, because the cat landed on his tummy, now he has an uncontrollable need to pee, and he's panicking because he can't find his wee-wee stick, aka his penis. And it's stuck in the folds of his belly. The team eventually manages to pull his wee-wee stick out, and he proceeds to spray them in the face with urine. So Mel Chemical is very unimpressed with this team. They've really failed at saving this cat out of this tree. Mel Chemical says sarcastically, "I guess this is where they send abortions that live," referring to a Super Duper. Hughie, listening on from the car, really doesn't like this mean remark that Mel Chemical has made. So Super Duper heads home, and we can see that the cat is now stuck on the roof of a house. Later on in the day, back at Super Duper HQ, Auntie Sis asked Mel Chemical what did he do to deserve the punishment of being assigned to them. She knows he obviously is here against his own wishes and hates it, and Mel Chemical explains back on his previous team called Team Titanic, he wanted to have sex with the orange girl on the team who is the girlfriend of the team's leader, so Mel Chemical shapeshifted into her boyfriend and had sex with her, but he was eventually found out. And as punishment for this, he was sent to join Super Duper. Auntie Sis is disgusted with this story, and she tells Mel Chemical that the kids in Super Duper aren't like that. They don't need to be exposed to that kind of thing. They are about as far away from that kind of hero shenanigans that goes on at places like Herogasm. They just genuinely want to use their powers they have to do good and make the world a better place. They want to be superheroes, and they do what they can. It's not easy for them. There are some pretty obvious limitations to their abilities, and their outlook is a little sheltered, but we are perfectly happy the way we are. So Auntie Sis is basically pleading with Mel Chemical to not corrupt her team. Back at the boys' HQ, Mother's Milk and Frenchie are alone, and Mother's Milk is looking into some Vought American files they received from the Legend, and Mother's Milk is curious why Butcher sent Hughie to investigate Super Duper, because Super Duper does seem like a pretty harmless team. So Mother's Milk realizes that the reason that Mel Chemical joined Super Duper was not because they were trying to make Super Duper more dark and do something serious with the team, but in fact it was just a punishment for Mel Chemical. So Mother's Milk is wondering, why was Butcher lying to Hughie? And then Mother's Milk says, "What kind of goddamn games are you playing now?" in reference to Butcher. So Mother's Milk is a little suspicious of Butcher's motivations. Now Hughie and Annie are talking on the phone. Annie and Hughie still don't know about each other's secret lives, but Annie is talking about quitting her job, and she is worried if Hughie will still love her if he found something out about her he didn't like. But Hughie reassures Annie he will love her no matter what. Later on in the day, the members of Super Duper are all eating ice cream. Bobby Bedoing is scarfing down tons of it. Now, Black Hole, who's supposed to be able to eat anything, says he could eat that much if he wanted to as well. So he tries to eat his entire ice cream, including bowl and spoon, but he starts to choke on it though. And Hughie is watching this go down. The members of Super Duper are panicking. Black Hole can't breathe. Hughie apparently got training from Frenchie about how to do the Heimlich maneuver, and if needed, how to do a tracheotomy. Even being trained to do that under an element of stress, simulated by the female wielding a chainsaw near Hughie's face as he does a tracheotomy on a dummy. So even though Hughie is just supposed to be observing Super Duper and not sort of interact with them, he decides to jump into action and save Black Hole's life because he's afraid that this Black Hole is gonna die. So Hughie performs the tracheotomy on Black Hole by stabbing something into his throat so that the oxygen can sort of escape there. So Black Hole is saved, and Super Duper is happy, and they are thanking Hughie immensely. and they ask for Hughie's name, and Hughie, who's supposed to be undercover, he lies and says his name is Hamish. And the issue ends with them all hugging Hughie or Hamish, and Butcher is watching in the distance, and he is a little bit annoyed that Hughie broke his cover right now. Issue 42, The Innocents, Part 3 of 4. So Mother's Milk is on the phone with the legend because he's read all these VOD American files and now he's suspicious of Butcher and what's going on with Hughie. So he's talking with the legend about how, Hughie potentially might be a spy for VOD American. And the legend is sort of talking out his theories, and the legend says that he doesn't think Hughie is a spy for VOD American because back when they were dealing with the G-Men, it looks like Godalkin was given some sort of kill order to take out Hughie, and that order really only would have came from VOD American, and if VOD American gave that order, that means that Hughie most likely isn't working for VOD American. So Mother's Milk is thinking about this, and he thinks it's a good theory, and it sounds convincing, so he's kind of convinced of Hughie's innocence by this. Now, Hughie is on the phone, parked down the street from SUPERDUPER HQ, and Hughie says that he's going to leave some bug listening devices inside the SUPERDUPER HQ, and then he's just going to come home. But just then, Bobby Badoing is bouncing around the street, and he accidentally bounces into Hughie's car he's parked in and smashes it and causes all sorts of destruction to the car. And then all the members of SUPERDUPER crowd around and they offer Hughie, or Hamish, which is the fake name Hughie told them, and they offer him to come inside their HQ and get cleaned up as they are apologizing to him. And, Hughie's kind of thinking to himself that, well, this will be a good opportunity to maybe plant those bugs since they're inviting me inside. Now, inside SUPERDUPER HQ, Lady Fold is talking to Auntie Sis in the bathroom, and they are discussing Lady Fold's menstrual powers, and just then Mel Chemical comes in, and Auntie Sis shoos him outside the bathroom. And then Auntie Sis and Mel Chemical have a conversation outside that bathroom door, and Mel Chemical is complaining that Auntie Sis ratted him out to VOD American, and she told VOD American that Mel Chemical was being rude and abusive to his new teammates, and that they don't want him in SUPERDUPER at all. And Mel Chemical tells Auntie Sis that he's on probation with VOD American, and anything negative VOD writes in their reports about him gets him further and further away from getting back on his regular team, Team Titanic. So he wants Auntie Sis to stop telling VOD negative things. And Auntie Sis says, well, then you better be on your best behavior if you want a gold star from me. You can start with cutting out the bad language. And Mel Chemical does not take this well. And then he has an evil, mischievous look on his face. So Hughie has now entered inside SUPERDUPER HQ, and they are washing Hughie's clothes and giving him some new clothes to change into. Bobby Badoing is stuffing his face again. All of a sudden, Mel Chemical walks in, and then Clanker swears from his Tourette's once again. Mel Chemical starts laughing hysterically from this, and Hughie tells Mel Chemical to stop being such a prick and give the boy a chance. It's not his fault he's swearing. And while Hughie's saying this, he's also planting some bugs in the kitchen there. And Mel Chemical is pissed at this Hughie for talking back to him, and he threatens Hughie. Now, just then, though, Auntie Sis walks in, and Mel Chemical, who is trying to be on good behavior, he plays it cool and he says goodbye because he doesn't want another write-up of being sent to VOD American. So the members of SUPERDUPER then go and give Hughie a tour of their headquarters. Now, jumping over to Annie. Annie's in a coffee shop, and she's writing a letter to Hughie on her laptop. She's confessing to being a superhero and a member of the Seven and what she had to do to join them, but she's too embarrassed by this, and she decides not to save the file, and she closes her computer. So we're starting to see Annie getting really conflicted about having her secret life and wanting to come clean with Hughie. Now, back at SUPERDUPER HQ, the tour must be over because Hughie is back outside and he's monitoring them. And inside, Auntie Sis is talking to Bobby Badoing, And Bobby shares this story of being scared, of eating himself, a bad dream that he's had. And Auntie Sis explains that she has a fear as well. She is a little bit like claustrophobic, stemming from some sort of memory when she was a baby where she got trapped in her aunt's underpants that flew off the clothesline and sort of engulfed her. So that's sort of what her big fear is. But we see that this Bobby Bedoing she was talking to is not actually Bobby, it is Mel Chemical in disguise because he has shape-shifting abilities. So he was just pretending to be Bobby, and he wanted to get some information on Auntie Sis's greatest fear that he could perhaps utilize later. Now, later on in the night, Hughie is pulling into his motel and he asks Butcher for permission to go home because now he's planted the bug, so he's ready to leave. But Butcher says at least give it one more day. So they hang up the phone, and then Butcher is standing outside Hughie's motel room, and we see Butcher is talking to Terror, his dog, and he explains that he needs to get Hughie somehow to fight Mel Chemical. It's the only way Butcher can be sure or not if Hughie is compromised and working for Vought American. Because if Hughie was working for Vought American, then they would have tipped off Mel Chemical to watch out for Hughie and be sure not to hurt him. But if Hughie is not working for Vought American, then Mel Chemical won't hold back in a fight. So it's a little bit of a dangerous risk that Butcher is sort of using here to suss out whether Hughie is good or not. Now, Butcher also has some missed phone calls from Mother's Milk on his phone. Mother's Milk is trying to phone Butcher to tell him that Hughie is not working for Vought American and to stop whatever crazy plan he has. And the issue ends with Mother's Milk, who's been drinking. He is standing outside Vought American headquarters, and he appears to be waiting for James Stillwell to leave. Issue 43, The Innocents, Part 4 of 4. So Mother's Milk walks right up to James Stillwell outside of Vought American's headquarters on the street, and he confronts Stillwell about ordering Godalkin of the G-Men to try and kill Hughie. Now, Stillwell plays it super cool though, and he says to Mother's Milk, no one wants an escalation here. Stillwell claims he knows nothing about what Mother's Milk is talking about. He's lying though. And Stillwell then says, I don't want trouble here. So if you are involved in a dispute of some kind and you have a complaint about the actions of your opponent, let me make a suggestion. Grow up. Stillwell is basically saying, don't be mad at your enemies for trying to destroy you. They are your enemies after all. So Mother's Milk then leaves frustrated because he's not really going to do anything right now here on the street. And he tries to phone Butcher some more and get in contact with Butcher. Now, back at Super Duper HQ, Mel Chemical attacks Auntie Sis by shapeshifting into the form of her greatest fear, a pair of underwear coming to engulf Auntie Sis and cover her. Mel Chemical seems to be successful in his attack, and Auntie Sis seems to be struggling inside him. All of a sudden, the other members of Super Duper come to confront Mel Chemical, but he just threatens them too, even trying to force Ladyfold and Stool Shadow to blow him. Then Hughie, who's overhearing all this, runs inside the house to the rescue, and it looks like Hughie and Mel Chemical are going to square off. Outside the Super Duper house, Butcher is there, and apparently he has 23 missed calls from Mother's Milk. He finally picks up the phone, and Mother's Milk tells Butcher that he doesn't know what Butcher is planning, but Hughie is not working for Vought American. And then they have a little exchange here. Butcher says, you talked to the legend behind my back? And then Mother's Milk angry says, and what about what you did? You sent Hughie into some shit with Mel Chemical. You didn't even tell the rest of us. You took Super Duper's address out of their file so I couldn't find you. You're goddamn right I went to the legend. So then Butcher replies, alright, never mind all that for the moment. What makes you so sure Hughie's not working for Vought American? And Mother's Milk replies, what makes you so sure he is? Butcher argues, he's shagging Starlight, the new member of the Seven. Butcher says he saw him kissing her right in front of where they work. And then Mother's Milk says, well, did you consider maybe he doesn't know who she is? And then Butcher replies, well, Legend did say the same thing, but come on, how could Hughie not know? And then Mother's Milk makes a compelling argument. He says, oh shit, I don't know. How could he answer the goddamn door with blood from her snatch all over him? How could he end up taking a shit on the floor of Tech Knight's cave? Because he's Hughie, man. And then Mother's Milk says, Look, I took a run at that guy from Vaught American, referring to his confrontation with James Stillwell. He gave the order. He told them to kill Hughie. So whatever you're doing, stop it now, because Hughie ain't working with Vaught. And back inside the Super Duper house, Hughie is confronting Malchemical, and Hughie eventually punches him. It does not really hurt Malchemical though. Malchemical shapeshifts his hands into a tentacle, and he shoves it down Hughie's mouth. Now Hughie goes to tackle Malchemical, and then Malchemical turns into a gas form, and Hughie falls right through him into a wall. Butcher then heads inside the house, and we see Malchemical is holding Hughie with his tentacles, and Hughie looks really beat up, really in bad shape. So Butcher busts into the house. Malchemical turns into a gas form once again to avoid getting hit, but Butcher was ready for this because he knows how to take down Malchemical. So Butcher, he pulls out a lighter and sets Malchemical aflame, and Malchemical burns up and dies. Now Butcher sees Hughie bloodied on the floor, looking worse than he thought, and the members of Super Duper are looking on. Now Clanker swears again because of his Tourette's, and Butcher, he doesn't really know about Clanker's affliction and with his Tourette's, so he takes offense to what Clanker said, and he's like, "What did you say?" And the Super Duper members are apologizing for Clanker's swearing. They're trying to explain the situation. Butcher looks like he's gonna kill all the members of Super Duper here, and the members of Super Duper are scared for their lives. Hughie, who's then barely alive, grabs onto Butcher's leg and says, "Don't hurt them. They're just like we kids." And then Butcher says, "Wash your mouth out, Hughie. They're soups." And Hughie says, "Oh no, look at them. They're not doing anyone any harm." Butcher gives up, and he's gonna let Super Duper live. He picks up Hughie and carries Hughie out of the building, and Super Duper, who thought Butcher was going to kill them, they look very happy to be alive. After some time has passed, back at the boys' HQ, Mother's Milk and Butcher are yelling and arguing with each other. Mother's Milk is pissed that Butcher sent Hughie in alone and didn't consult the team, and Butcher yells that that's the kind of decisions he has to make as team leader, and he's angry that Mother's Milk went on the legend behind his back. He's also pissed that Mother's Milk confronted the guy from Vaught American, as tensions are really high between them and the boys right now. The two of them, though, eventually calm down a bit and say, "What are we gonna do, fight all night?" Hughie has apparently come out of surgery. He had some lacerations, a cracked rib, and 2 missing teeth. Now, Butcher tells Mother's Milk, though, "Look, it's important that Hughie doesn't find out what really happened. I don't want him knowing that we're onto his girlfriend yet. We gotta be smart about that, work out the best way to play it. Starlight could be our best bet yet for having a serious pop at the 7. And Mother's Milk, who's kind of annoyed that Butcher is even talking about this right now, says he's gonna go visit Hughie in the hospital right now. Now, the issue ends ominously, jumping over to Homelander, who is sitting somewhere high up in the sky, thinking to himself, "I can do anything. Maybe it's time I got started." Issue 44, Believe, Part 1 of 4. So this is the first issue by new artist Russell Braun. It's a little bit of a step down from Darick Robertson, who, I really like the look that Darick Robertson established for the boys, but it's not terrible art. It's better than John McCrea's Hero Gasm art, but it's just different a little bit is all. So we open up on some sort of commercial starring the Homelander with a whole bunch of little kids. It's advertising some sort of religious family event called Believe, which is held in Central Park this upcoming weekend, where the Believe Ministries, the Capes for Christ, the Redeemers, Sidekick 12, and the Jesus League of Americans will all be there. Now, we jump over to Annie and Hughie, and they are spending some time together. Clearly, there's been a little bit of a time jump because Hughie is all healed up now. Hughie made up some sort of accident on his fake insurance job for the reason that he got all injured recently. Now, jumping forward in time a bit, back at the 7 HQ, Stillwell tells Homelander that he wants to go over the agenda for the Believe event on Saturday. Homelander says he doesn't want to go to that shit, and Stillwell also tells Annie that she has to go to the event as well and appear on behalf of Capes for Christ. Now, Annie says that she can't do that. She doesn't consider herself a Christian anymore. It wouldn't be right for her to attend, but Stillwell insists, though, that both of them have to go, or maybe Yvonne American will rethink their relationship with the Seven. So both of them cave under this pressure and say they'll go to the Believe event. Now, Butcher and Hughie are sitting outside the Believe event, and they are watching them set up, and Butcher asks Hughie, "Why did you go and fight Malchemical?" And Hughie says that he just had to save those super duper kids. "I just couldn't sit back and watch Malchemical ruin all their lives." And Butcher says that they're soups, Hughie, and one of these days you're gonna wake up and see that they're all the same. Butcher is not that angry though. He's relieved that Hughie is alive. And Butcher explains that this Believe event is a real moneymaker for Von American. The soups think that they're literally God's gift to the world, and while we're there, we do a bit of mingling and see if anyone lets their guard down and maybe pick up some juicy gossip. And Butcher wants Hughie to do a little bit of light snooping at the event, but try not to get all Good Samaritan about it, like what you did with Super Duper and what you did with Gee Whiz. So it looks like Hughie and Butcher are on a little bit of some better terms right now. Back at the 7 HQ, this is totally weird. A-Train is walking around, and he hears moaning in the distance. He hears, why? And then all of a sudden he sees Homelander is lying in the fetal position on the floor with his pants down, and he says, "Why can't I do the thing I can do?" Then Homelander overhears something and he says, "Is someone there?" And all of a sudden, A-Train just books it back over to where Jack from Jupiter is, and A-Train begins reading a magazine, and he pretends like he just didn't see anything weird right then. Everything's all cool. But you can understand that A-Train was a little bit freaking out about what he saw. It was weird to him. What is the deal with Homelander? Why was he in the fetal position crying? And Homelander kind of scares A-Train a bit, so he doesn't want Homelander to know he saw him. So sort of just a weird little turn of events here. Now back at the boys HQ, Butcher and Frenchie are arguing what Greg Mallory sounded like. Just a joking sort of conversation, and Butcher says that, "Oh yeah, he sounded like John Wayne," and then Frenchie says, "Oh, he sounded like Clint Eastwood," and then Mother's Milk, who's not in the mood, says, "He sounded like someone who knew what he was doing." So Butcher knows it's not time for fun and games. He sends Frenchie away, and Butcher and Mother's Milk kind of have a serious talk. Now, Mother's Milk wants Butcher to apologize to Hughie for what he did, sending Hughie into his potential death against Malchemical to test him. And Butcher says that he can't apologize to Hughie because then Hughie will know I thought he was working with Vought, and then Hughie will want to know why I thought he was working for Vought, and I'll have to tell him about Starlight, and I haven't figured out how to use that information yet. So Mother's Milk asks, what if Hughie figures it out on his own? How is he going to feel then? And Butcher says, well, I assume Hughie would feel bad, but the news is not going to be any better coming from me. So when the dust settles, Butcher promises that he's going to make it up to Hughie. Now, later on, Hughie and Annie are in Central Park, and they are looking at the Believe stage being built. And Hughie tells Annie about the accidental death of his past girlfriend caused by A-Train, and Annie is sickened to hear this. And she finally, and seriously, I can't believe it took this long, she finally confesses to Hughie that she is in fact a superhero. 44 issues in, and she finally admits this. Issue 45, Believe, Part 2 of 4. So Annie explains that she is the hero Starlight, and she is part of the Seven, and Hughie doesn't believe her, but then Annie starts to levitate to prove it. And Annie explains that she wasn't allowed to tell Hughie because she had to keep her identity a secret. And she also says you can't imagine how awful the Seven really are. They are the worst of all, the most disgusting, selfless, heartless people imaginable. They are like the exact opposite of the way it's supposed to be. And Annie says that thanks to Hughie, she could bear it. Hughie gave her strength, and she feels she can leave it all behind and be with someone real, be with Hughie. She says that she loves Hughie and wants to be with Hughie forever. Hughie does not take the news well though. He is sweating profusely. All of these memories are just popping up into his mind about his history with various hero groups, and Hughie vomits, and he tells Annie to get away from him, and Hughie just runs away. Now the Believe event is kicking off. Frenchie and the female, who's in a ridiculous little girl with a blonde wig outfit, they are walking the sort of grounds of the event. And a little kid swipes the female's lollipop she was eating, and the female's instinct is to rip the kid's face off, but Frenchie manages to stop her before she actually does it, and the little kid walks away with the lollipop. Now, Frenchie buys a whole bunch of balloons, and the female goes and climbs up into the pool of balloons in the sky, and she's going to hide in them and spy on people from the balloons. Now, inside this tent, we see this religious hero who goes by the name Oh Father, and he has a group of sidekicks called Sidekick 12. And Oh Father tells the audience to leave as it's time for their break. Now, Homelander comes into this tent to talk to Oh Father, and he tells Oh Father that he needs to work on his addiction to young sidekicks. Because this Oh Father has like 12 little kid sidekicks. It's weird. Homelander has something planned for tonight, though, and he wants Oh Father to give him the lay of the land about where the various heroes stand. Now, while this convo is going on, the female who's hidden in balloons is eavesdropping on this whole conversation. Now, Hughie, who's back at home, he feels conflicted about how he reacted to Annie's confession. On the one hand, Hughie is lying to her about his double life as well and all the stuff he does with the boys. On the other hand, Annie is a supe, and he's having a hard time getting over that. All of a sudden, Hughie remembers about Butcher being at Believe, and Hughie worries that Annie might be in trouble from Butcher because Butcher hates all soups, so he tries to phone her back, but he can't get a hold of her, so he runs off and he tries to grab a cab outside. Now, back at the Believe event, Annie is giving this pre-written speech that was given to her, and I must say it's pretty intense. Annie says, Muslims and Jews and Buddhists and all other people who believe what they believe, and the atheists, especially the atheists, they're all wrong. And the first thing you have to accept as a Christian, there is no compromise. No considering other points of view. No meeting anyone else halfway. You either believe in Jesus Christ as your personal savior or you don't, and if you don't, I pity you. Now, Homelander is watching this speech, and he's talking to Oh Father, and Homelander says that this Annie, she's a believer. She's into all that superhero shit, truth and justice and so on. And Homelander asks what other heroes are like Annie and share her outlook and are all for the superhero thing. And Oh Father says, other than the members of SUPERDUPER 0, Annie is basically out there on her own. Now, Homelander is pleased to hear this. Homelander then says that Vought is pushing for soups to be a part of national defense. So Homelander wants to know how many soups would be willing to fight for Vought American and Vic the Veep to ensure the success of this plan, even if it meant open conflict against the government or military of the US. So Homelander is planning some serious moves here. He wants to know who's on board. And Oh Father estimates it would maybe be about 60 to 65% of the soups tops. While Homelander asks for Oh Father to arrange a get-together later on with whoever he thinks will come on board for this plan. Sound them out, keep it vague, and I'll tell you when and where. Now, jumping back over to Hughie where we saw him last, he is trying to grab a cab, and all of a sudden Hughie runs into Butcher. And Hughie is kind of screams, Butcher kind of startled him. Butcher tries to calm Hughie down, and Butcher wants Hughie to confide in him. So Butcher tells Hughie that he knows he's been having a rough time being part of the boys recently, with Mal Chemical and that whole situation. Also, he knows that Hughie has never got his head around the idea of hurting people. And Butcher says that he thinks he's been wrong trying to force the fighting onto Hughie. Butcher is just used to the military and dealing with hard cases like Mother's Milk and psychos like Frenchie and the female, and he gets them to follow orders by kind of bullshitting them or bullying them. But Butcher feels that isn't the right way to deal with Hughie. Hughie isn't a nutter. He's just an ordinary bloke, and a decent one too. So he tells Hughie, "You're my mate, and from now on, if there's something in your head, if something's bothering you and you want to talk about it, do. You talk and I'll listen. There ain't nothing you can say to me. Whatever problems you're having, you tell me and we'll sort them out. You can trust me, Hughie." So Butcher is trying to get Hughie back in his good graces, but Butcher is also kind of trying to manipulate Hughie a bit here as well. Issue 46, Believe, Part 3. So the issue opens and Hughie has explained this whole Annie being Starlight situation to Butcher, which Hughie just found out about. The Butcher, of course, already knew all this, but he acts surprised, and now he has Hughie sort of trusting him again. Now, jumping over to the Believe event again, Homelander and Starlight are in the VIP tent, and Homelander actually gives Annie a compliment. He says, "I was impressed with how you stood up for yourself the other day with Stillwell about not wanting to do this Believe shit." And Annie says, "Well, it didn't really do me much good, did it? I mean, here I am after all." And Homelander says, "It's good to remind them that we're not their dogs, and anything that pushes Stillwell's blood pressure up a notch or two has got to be a positive thing. Definitely feel free to give him a little bit more shit." And then Annie says, "Actually, I'm thinking about asking Stillwell to quit the team." And then Homelander, he couldn't resist patronizing her a little bit by saying, "Oh, what, after all the hard work you put into joining us in the first place?" And he's referencing Annie's coerced blowjob in Volume 1, so he's mocking her here a bit. And then Annie storms off saying, "What the hell am I thinking, confiding in someone like you?" And then Homelander says, "Yes, well, the devil does get into me sometimes." And then Annie replies, "Was he in you when you made me do that?" Back in Volume 1. And then Homelander replies, "Nobody made anyone do anything. We gave you a choice and you went right to work. I've never forced myself on..." And then Homelander pauses. And he remembers those gruesome photos that Butcher sent him, which show him doing all these depraved things to people, killing people, eating people. And Homelander thinks about it, and he has a look of regret as well as confusion on his face. And he snaps out of it, and he tells Annie, "Listen, you can take tonight off. That's what I came here to tell you. Anyone asks, tell them it's on my authority." And all that's left today is that stupid contest where someone wins dinner with me, and you're not needed for that. So apparently part of the Believe event is that someone gets to win dinner with the Homelander, and that's the only thing really left in today's festivities. But Homelander, really, he wants Annie gone because he's planning to have his super secret hero meeting later on tonight. Back over to Butcher and Hughie. Hughie says, "You're not going to kill me, are you? You probably think she's been using me to find out stuff about us." Butcher reassures Hughie that they're cool and Hughie can trust him, and Hughie then tells Butcher the full, complete story and everything about Annie and their history. They are just together trying to work out and suss out if Annie was maybe using Hughie in some capacity, because maybe Annie is like a VOD American loyalist and she was just trying to sort of manipulate Hughie and find out information about the boys for them. So they're just not entirely sure if Annie is 100% trustworthy. Now Butcher later on phones Frenchie for a status update. Frenchie explains about Homelander's meeting with O-Father, and that apparently there is some sort of secret meeting later on with the Homelander and various supes that will go along with his plan. So while this call is going on, we see the female. She pisses in that kid's ice cream cone who stole her lollipop earlier. Female is still hiding among the balloons, and the kid walks by with this ice cream and she pees on his ice cream cone. So anyway, Butcher though, he thinks Frenchie's got some good intel here about this whole super secret hero meeting, and he tells Frenchie to try and get in this meeting that the Homelander is having if he can and see what he can learn. Afterwards, Butcher and Hughie leave the cab and they run into Mother's Milk. Now Mother's Milk is pissed at Butcher because his flask is missing, and he thinks Butcher purposely moved it. Now Mother's Milk says to Butcher, "I ain't playing. I always keep it in the exact same place. Bottom drawer, right hand side. It's always there, and today it ain't." Butcher says he doesn't know where your flask is. Now we learn that Mother's Milk keeps his mother's breast milk, a small supply of it, in this flask. which last volume we learned that he needs to survive. So with that flask missing, that means he has to go visit his mom at the source to get some more breast milk. And Mother's Milk kind of hates visiting his mom and getting more milk. So he's not looking forward to this, and that's why he was so angry. Butcher and Hughie are back at the boys' HQ, and Butcher tells Hughie that we should just watch the surveillance tapes of the 7 and see if they talk about setting Annie up with you, and then we'll know for sure if Annie is legitimately into Hughie or if it's all some ploy and she is lying. Which honestly, this sounds like a good idea. This sounds like a good way to test Annie's loyalty if you were unsure about it. So Hughie asks, so who is it that put the bugs in the 7 HQ anyway? Was it some cleaner or contractor or something? Now Butcher, he doesn't really want to tell Hughie who their source is that's planting these bugs. And Hughie says that, oh, you're probably right. Shouldn't trust me with such sensitive information anyway. But Butcher decides, what the hell? He's going to tell Hughie who planted the bugs in the 7 HQ. And apparently we learn that the person who's been planting the bugs in 7 headquarters is in fact Queen Maeve. Oh shit, that's a big deal. The Butcher explains that the Legend and Queen Maeve apparently go way back. And back when the Legend was still a Victory Comics, Queen Maeve was young, she was the new girl in the big city. And the Legend was the funny old bloke doing his favorite uncle routine. And back then, Queen Maeve wasn't a stuck-up bitch, so they were kind of friends at Victory Comics. And then eventually, after some time goes by, about 10 years in the past, Maeve, she just grew to hate the Homelander so much that she wanted a way to screw him over. So she got in touch with the Legend, and the Legend brokered some sort of meeting between her and the boys. Now at this point in time, the boys didn't have much info on the 7, so they jumped at the chance to get any kind of info. Now Maeve, she didn't want to do anything to get herself into serious shit. She didn't want to give up the good superhero life and all the money and prestige that came with that, but she wanted to do something. It was burning in her gut. She could hardly stand still. So that's why she made the meeting. And they asked her to put a couple of cameras in the 7 HQ, and she does. She thinks that's perfect. Pictures, embarrassment, severe frustration. That's the perfect way to mess with the Homelander, was her thinking. Now Butcher was talking to Hughie and he was theorizing about why Queen Maeve hates Homelander so much that she would resort to this, to coming to the boys. Now one theory was that at some point in time, back in the day, some naked photos of Queen Maeve came out. Some sexual photos of her engaging in intercourse, and they were her most likely having sex with the Homelander. But of course, you can't see the Homelander's face in the photos, only Maeve's face. And when those photos came out, Maeve got pissed, and that's probably why she's upset with the Homelander. That's what the Legend and Mallory's theory is on why Maeve decided to plant those bugs in the 7 HQ. Butcher doesn't fully buy into that theory though, because the photo incident happened long before she got in touch with the Legend. And Maeve's constantly having sex with bodybuilders at the 7 HQ, and she doesn't seem bothered by the fact that there's hidden cameras that she's planted, so she knows there's hidden cameras that are recording her, and she doesn't seem like the type to hold a grudge about sexy photos getting out. So there must be some sort of other motivation about why she hates the Homelander so much, but Butcher isn't exactly sure what it is though. But either way, even though they were a little bit skeptical, Maeve put in the cameras and the feed started coming through and everything seemed to be working fine. And Butcher says that they've collected tons of good stuff on those cameras over the years. So Butcher and Hughie, they spend a few hours going through various footage. And Butcher then leaves to go get some Chinese takeout, and Hughie continues watching the tapes, and then he gets to the point where Annie first joined the 7, and he sees Annie blowing Homelander, A-Train, and Black Noir. Hughie is horrified by what he sees. Now we see Butcher, and he knew that Hughie was going to get to this point in the tapes, and he planned for Hughie to see the tapes this way today. Issue 47, Believe Part 4. So Hughie is puking in the bathroom after seeing what Annie did on the videotape. Butcher watched the tape as well, and Butcher is trying to convince Hughie that Annie's just been laughing at him the whole time and was never really into him, and that Annie is damaged goods. But Hughie says, but she was in love with me. And Butcher says, maybe she believes that, but look at what she gets up to. She's either pissing herself laughing or she's just plain mental, but either way it don't look good. Now Hughie asks Butcher, what do you think I should do? And then Butcher says, well, at first I was thinking of using her as a source, but after this, I don't know. I'm just gonna leave it up to you, Hughie. Do what you want. But don't tell her how you saw her getting her big break in the 7, alright? Now back at the 7 HQ, Annie's talking to Queen Maeve. And Annie's feeling lost. She has no other friends. Her parents suck. She really has no one else in the world but Hughie. So she always just sort of ends up back at the 7. It's the only place she can really come back to. And Queen Maeve replies, it always is. You know, you can't talk to the little people. What the hell do we have in common with them anyway? And even if you could start again, where would you be able to live in the manner which you're accustomed to? And Annie replies, you know, there is more to life than this crap, this stuff in the 7. And then Maeve responds, then color me shallow. It's warm, there's a roof, and there's an endless supply of meaningless shit up here. And I can look at the view to my heart's content. It really is the perfect place to run back to. Vots say we're the 7, Vots say we live here. The one and only drawback is the inescapable certainty that all you have are other superheroes. Just then, Hughie texts Annie and says he wants to meet her in the park. Now back at Believe, the winner for the contest to have dinner with Homelander is announced. And the winners are the Muller family of Larmount, New York. Homelander then waves bye to the crowd and closes out the Believe ceremony, officially ending the event. And he then picks up the Mullers in their car and he flies them into the sky. And they are supposed to be flying to the restaurant that they are going to be eating at. And then just after this event ends, all the other heroes then fly into the sky as well, and they are going to have their secret meeting with the Homelander. Frenchie and Female are watching this all happen from the ground, and when they see all the heroes fly up into the sky, they really want to be able to get up there so they can hear what is going to be said. Now Hughie and Annie meet in the park, and Hughie is being really mean to Annie. He calls her a whore, and he decides to tell her that he saw the sex tape of her. Hughie lies and says someone mailed it to him. And Hughie's really angry, and he's just calling her a bitch, and he's asking her, is this how you get your kicks? And Annie is trying to explain, and Hughie just keeps saying nasty stuff to her, and then Annie says, you're mad, you've every right to be mad, but please stop saying these things. You're smashing everything we've got between us. We'll never be able to put it together again. And Hughie just tells her to F off. Now Homelander, jump back over to him, he's flying up in the sky, and he's still carrying this Muller family. And the Muller family is saying that they're getting cold. And will we be at the restaurant soon? And Homelander says to the Muller family, it's all shit, you know. Believe? It's just a scam designed to separate half-wits like you from your money. You may as well have burned your money. The only man in the sky is me. And then he drops them to their death, and they are screaming. Homelander now in the clouds with the various superheroes, and then he says, let's talk. So jumping back over to Hughie and Annie, Hughie says to Annie, you know, A-Train was one of the guys you blew. He was the one that killed my ex-girlfriend. And Annie says she's so sorry, she never wanted to hurt him. Hughie's basically breaking up with her though. And he tells her that he's gonna go back home to Scotland, but Annie wants Hughie to stay so they can work it out. She tells Hughie that you're the only person that means anything to me. And then Hughie says, well then you've got nothing. And then Annie replies, you said we found each other. You said you were in love with me. And then Hughie says, I was just scared of being alone. That's the only reason I said it. And then Hughie walks away and says, I don't ever want to see you again. And then Annie's pleading, she's crying, and she's like, no, 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 don't do this. You found me, remember? You found me. Nothing counts but that. Everything else is just crap we can fix or get rid of. But this is what really matters. Two people finding each other. That's the most important thing in the world. I'm so sorry I hurt you. Please don't walk away. But Hughie, he does walk away though. Although he kind of felt like Annie was maybe right with what she was saying, but he was too stubborn to admit it to himself. So he just dredged up whatever he needed to keep going, to put one foot in front of the other and walk away from Annie. And Annie is in tears on the ground. And that is the end of the issue and the end of this volume. So that was The Boys, Volume 7, and I thought there was a lot to like in this book. I loved Super Duper. I love that they were so wholesome and quirky. All the various members are just kind of so funny. Bobby Bedoing was hilarious. Super Duper was great. I liked the Believe event and seeing that portrayed, this sort of religious event, a little bit propaganda-ish. That was good, and that was something we saw in season 1 of the TV show, so it was great seeing how the comic version differs from that. I did not love certain things. I didn't love that Butcher was so focused on Hughie potentially being a member of Vought American to the point that he sent Hughie practically to his death against Mal Chemical. So I didn't love that plot point. I also did not love Hughie's reaction to Annie being a superhero and a member of the Seven and what she had to do to join the Seven. And Hughie didn't even really let her explain the whole situation. So that was a little bit frustrating to read. But despite all that, I still enjoyed this volume, just maybe not as much as some of the better volumes that we had earlier. So I'm going to give this one an 8 out of 10. So thank you all for watching. I'm going to start working on Volume 8 called Highland Laddie, and I'm going to try to get that out next weekend.